I need to tell you something about Alabama. I need to tell you why I love this time of year. I love this time of year because, so Nick Saban retires at Alabama, and then Kalen DeBoer gets the job. And everyone has an immediate opinion on it. I have friends, I went and counted one the other day specifically, who have had 4 different unique takes on Kalen DeBoer at Alabama, like whether he will succeed or not. 4! Dude's changed his mind 4 times. And it is right now, February 22nd, and his first spring practice is still several weeks away. That's why I love this time of year. I encourage it. Get as many takes out there as possible so that you can go back and cherry pick whichever ones you got right, because inevitably, if you throw every take out there, you got to get one right. It's not the worst strategy in the world. And so I wanted to remind you guys of something, because there has been so much happening in this sport that a bombshell goes off. Saban retires, and then Kalen DeBoer, fresh off a national championship appearance, gets the head job at Alabama, and it's almost like that feels like old news already, and it was like a month ago. It's just that so much has happened. Well, let me tell you, because I was really kind of marrying this with several of you over the course of any given week, ask what I'm thinking about this. Just a reminder, before we open spring ball there, whether it's great or a disaster, I think he upgraded his coaching staff overall. I'm not talking about head coach for head coach. I'm saying staff overall. I think he upgraded that coaching staff. One of the great unspokens behind the scenes was down the stretch, as it turns out, down the stretch of Nick Saban's career, last few years, he had had not a hard time, but he had had a harder time than he had years prior filling his staff with the names he wanted to fill them with. And that was just because you cannot ignore age, and you cannot ignore that guys want to sign on to a program where they know there'll be longevity. It's the same reason why if you're on the hot seat, it's really hard to go higher, because guys look and say, what am I going to move there for 9 months and then I'm out the door with you? Well, it's the same way if you're going to coach for a guy. I mean, Saban was conducting coaching interviews 5 minutes before he retired. So a lot of that was valid. So anyway, I think DeBoer upgraded his staff. Does he have SEC chops? Does the staff have SEC chops? Now, that right there is a good question. By SEC chops, do you mean are they familiar with the territory? A lot of them aren't. A lot of them have never lived in or coached in the South. Now, only one way to baptize yourself into that. But the other part is, a lot of you have noticed, like, he's taking guys from Washington, he's taking guys from Baylor, and there's not a lot of that incestuous hiring, in the best of ways, that you normally see in the South. A lot of times when a guy gets a job in the SEC, he just goes and takes some dudes from Florida and LSU and now Texas and Oklahoma. And sometimes it works out. Other times it just means that you got a stale conference, and it's ripe for a guy from outside the block to move in. Most notably, guys like Urban Meyer did this in the past. Saban even did it. Saban didn't get the staffers he wanted at first either, but it's been done before. But at the same time, it's an adjustment period. It's an adjustment period for everyone. I think short term, it was probably like drinking water from a fire hose for them. I don't look, 2 things. Okay, so first, I think they'll be fine on that front. But secondly, there is a large contingent of people, I think, that are waiting for them to lose their first game this year, whether it's Georgia or whether it's earlier than that. Maybe they go lose at Wisconsin earlier in the season. And that will be like a referendum on Kalen DeBoer. And it'll be really, really whacked out, and there won't be much logic behind it. But I am personally deciding to think well beyond just 2024 with this hire. And it's not that he has to rebuild the program or anything. It's a turnkey winner if you got the right structure in place. But to pretend like, well, the best of all time stepped away, you ought to just step right in here and I ought not even be able to tell a difference from 50,000 feet. It's crazy, crazy. So I think they'll be okay long term, but I was okay riding a bike long term. The first time that Meemaw took her hand off my lower back and pushed me down the hill, it was wobbly. I didn't fall, I don't think, but it was wobbly. So if it's wobbly out of the gate, it's wobbly out of the gate. Long term, I'm telling you, I have very little doubt they'll be fine. I think that they absorbed the unavoidable really well, too. So the unavoidable is you lose Nick Saban, you know good and well a lot of those players were there to play for him, the Caleb Downses of the world, for example. So there was a lot about losing guys to the portal that was going to be unavoidable, and it didn't matter who took the job. It was going to be unavoidable. they controlled what they could control. Frankly, I don't even think it was the mass exodus of game changers that it was made out to be. I mean, you lose Caleb Downs now. That may be the best football player on your team. So there's no sugarcoating that. But some of the other big-time names they kept there, and I also think that post-spring portal window will be fascinating with Alabama. They also brought Austin Mack in at quarterback, who I know I've seen a lot of folks who cover Alabama just assuming Austin Mack is a 2025 and beyond name, and it's certain to be Milroe's team this year. And you guys may be right. I just want to watch spring ball before I, write that in pen myself. Nick Saban came into the SEC and redefined what it meant to win in the SEC, and that's a generation ago. So now you're going to hear a lot of folks, spring ball, media days, getting into this upcoming season where Bama won't be favored to win the SEC and may not even be the second favorite to win the SEC for the first time in a while. And they're going to say, Kalen DeBoer does not know the SEC, which is right. I don't want you to forget that the SEC doesn't know Kalen DeBoer either. And while it is really fun growing up where I grew up to pound your chest and talk about how a newcomer is about to get a dose of reality, and it does happen a fair amount. And quite notably, it's happened recently, even in the state of Alabama. Sometimes it's the inverse. Sometimes a new guy comes in and you find out, well, he kind of knows what he's doing. That stuff he was doing at Washington, turns out it does work here. Turns out there's not a total different way to skin the cat, or it turns out there's several different ways to do it. And also, the $1 million question around DeBoer and his staff right now is, are they going to be able to acquire talent? And I'm a believer, and I'll give you this equation, we'll move on. I'm a believer that it takes two things to recruit in the South. It takes a relentless pursuit. I mean, you got to be able to work 25 hours a day. You can't talk about, man, I worked 45 hours this week. I'm drained. Those folks burn out pretty quick. But if you want to recruit the SEC successfully, you got to be relentless. And I think he absolutely is. And number two, you got to know people. You've got to know people. The emphasis is on people. Not know people. You got to have ends here and ends there. You'll develop those relationships if you're good with folks and you're relentless. How do you think the ones who have the relationships, how do you think the ones who do know the people found ways to know the people? So that's a process. I think they'll be okay there. But my question, as we move on to you, is what is success for them? In other words, what is the thing Alabama could accomplish in 2024 where you look and you say, hey, I guess DeBoer was the right guy for the job. Is it an amount of wins? Is it a number of wins? Is it a level of play on the field? Do you care more about the recruiting class coming up? Just out of curiosity. No right or wrong answers, just out of curiosity.